This case study is on the film Hunger, which is an animation degree project by the director Vajra Pancharya, and it's guided by Professor Sumant Rao. This film is about hunger. Now, the feeling of hunger is something very internal. It can lead one's mind to various directions. And also, hunger is the most effective and upsetting drug, bitter and most ferocious. It is the creator of unfathomable disturbance of mind and imagination. Now, the film Hunger, it deals with the hunger hallucinations of a prisoner, basically who's deprived of food, and how he hallucinates to such an extent that he finally decides to listen to his inner self. So, the process that the director followed to conceive the film is like this, where he started the research and exploration. So the research and exploration began with reading books on the topic of hunger, also watching movies that kind of deal with a similar topic. The initial ideation starts with a mind map, then multiple stories. There are 3 stories that the director came up with and finally decided on choosing one of it. Then we have the pre-production, and the pre-production has different stages like final script. Then you start working on the character exploration. Then after that, you sort of start thumbnailing the storyboards, and you kind of design the concept art and the style of the film and explore more on that, and then final approach. Now, the visual production technique for this film was slightly interesting. It was initially planned to be a film in charcoal. Now, charcoal as a medium is very difficult to control because you have to animate frame by frame, and traditionally every frame, if you draw with charcoal, there'll be somewhat smudging happening here and there, and it will boil a lot. The film, like the frames will boil a lot, and it will look a bit jarry to the eye. So the director, after a lot of experimentation, he came up with this whole process where he draws like a line drawing is done first in Flash, then the charcoal texture overlay is done in Photoshop, and the whole thing is composited in After Effects. So also the sound designs, so some rough sound designs are created hands-on using coins and plastic materials, and and then later on stretched and synthesized in the software to create the mood and the ambience of the film. Now, to keep in mind, once you see the film deals with a closed space, and it deals with the agony and what the character is going through in this particular short film, and thus the sound plays a very important role in this. So the topic of hunger initially came into the director's mind by a story told by his father to him. Now, the story was quite intense in terms of its impact. It made him realize that how severe hunger is an issue. Now, the story told by his father was good, but a bit more research will probably make it better. So he began the explorations. He started reading about the biological reasons for hunger, how it originates and how it affects the state of mind. But the final story only emerged after reading a lot about hunger and some mind mapping. So the director started reading on this beautiful book by Viktor Frankl called as Man's Search for Meaning and Elie Wiesel's Night. Now, these books gave him an insight into the mind of a prisoner at the time of Holocaust. Viktor Frankl is one of the survivors of the Holocaust, the German Holocaust, and he's written about his experience and how much torture he faced while he was in the concentration camp, and his hallucinations and his things that he suffered as a prisoner. Also, the director watched a lot of movies. He explored interesting films on Holocaust, especially like Life is Beautiful, Schindler's List, The Pianist, and The Boys in Striped Pajamas, which inspired him to sort of shape the idea for the film. So the initial ideation kind of began by doing basic research, and initially the 3 stories came to being by connecting the mind map data and many other subconscious elements which were there at the back of his head. So this was the story 1, where a drought struck place in Rajasthan and a family which is suffering from hunger, and how hunger forces the thoughts of a mother to eat her own kid. Now this is the story that it's a true story, apparently happened in a remote area in Rajasthan long time back, and this was told by his father. So So this was one of the stories. The second story was a story of a beggar's death in a busy city street and his past being explored through a reverse narrative to the day he was young. It happened in a remote area in Rajasthan long time back, and this was told by his father. So this was one of the stories. The second story was a story of a beggar's death in a busy city street and his past being explored through a reverse narrative to the day he was young, how hunger led to his death. Now, the third story, which is what the director chose finally, was hunger hallucinations of a prisoner trapped in a concentration camp and how hunger for food converts to hunger for freedom in the end. So it's a beautiful story, and you'll understand more as we go further in the process. So this is like the mind map data where all the areas related to hunger were plotted on the sheet and connections were made to get the right links and sort of string the story through. So as you see here, hunger leads to starvation, craving, there is biological effects, there is lack of hunger sometimes. Metaphorically, hunger also kind of relates to knowledge, wealth, property, poverty, freedom, also power in a way, and lack of hunger kind of spreads to spiritual, Buddhist ideologies, losing interest in life. Now, there's so many connections that one can make with just this one word, and later on, can string these words together to form the story later. So, the pre-production for this particular film was that the director decided to work on this third story, as I said, because he was deeply shaken by the Holocaust. The atrocities that happened with Jewish race were inhuman. So after getting inspired, he started reading more about the concentration camp victims and their experiences. Viktor Frankl was one of the survivors of this camp, and his life story inspired him a lot, as his determination to live in such severe conditions sets an example of hope and positivity. So these are some of the words that comes into mind when the topic is explored, like hallucinations of prisoner, death, fury, starvation leading to mental trauma, physical fatigue and death, madness, laughter, extremities, imagination, lice, unhygienic condition. I mean, these are certain things that were popping in the director's head when he was imagining this particular film. The final script was as follows. After the final story was in place, it was time to put it into words. So a final script was decided. A script is always a great tool to understand your story better. So the director wrote down the minute details of the film in the script so that his visualizations for the film can become clear. Then also visual development was done. Now initially it started with slow and steady doodles which kind of give shape to the look and feel of the story, and the rough idea of the character was coming slowly in place. These were the initial sketches. As you see, they are very scribbly, but they have the essence of how the director wanted the film to probably look like in the end. So usually the director used to sit in a corner and doodle all day, and just to get the basic ideas out, and it kind of helped him visualize the character and story in a better way. Some more sketches and the scribbled feel of the character was somehow justifying the script as for the director, and gave a nice dark feel to the content of the film which he intended it to be. These are some of the final character design, again keeping it very loose and scribbly, and so this character kind of shows how the character was food deprived. He was skinny and almost close to a skeleton, as the food deprivation has caused loss of flesh and muscles and also some mental fatigue. Later on, a storyboard was made on the basis of the final script and kind of helps you see the movie in a visual sequence. So these are some of the storyboards done. Now if you see this, these are basically shot by shot division of the scenes, and since majority of the film happens in the prison, director thought that charcoal would be a better medium to get the feel of the film across in storyboard itself. So these storyboards were done in charcoal, and this whole grainy and dark feel and play with light and shadows kind of helps bring the mood of the film out. Some of the concept art and style exploration. So few concept arts were made to explore the dark style of the film, and these are the images. These are some charcoal and ink black and white washes, some very scribbly drawings which kind of brings the feel of the film out. Again, some color explorations, swatches to understand what overall tone and mood of the film could be. The final approach was like this. that these were the initial styles basically, as you see here, which were hand drawn on paper and then layered frame by charcoal. But animating, as I said, animating the complete film in this way was a very tedious process. So another process had to be figured out. So in the production stage, the director decided to animate the whole film with scribbles drawn in Flash and adding animated paint layer in Photoshop to get the desired feel of the film. So these are some of the final rendered frames from the film. So animatic for the film. Now animatic is a very important stage where you can see the entire film moving in time, but through just storyboards and bit of movement. So it kind of helps you time the film and get the narrative across. So after the storyboard was in place, it was time to start lining up the storyboard and make a rough animatic with scratch sound. So these are some of the shots from the final animatic. Now since the animatic was complete, the technique was as follows. So in terms of timing, the director started tackling shots one by one depending on their complexity. A plan sheet was made about how many shots could be tackled in one day, and then the process of animation began. Now planning your entire production, especially when you're an independent animator, it helps you plan your shots because you have, say, a few months to make the film. So planning is very important to kind of execute your project. So some of the process, the shots which were inside the prison were first animated in Flash, and below are the Flash drawing images. Then these frames were independently sort of painted in Photoshop with required shade and light and the mood that the director desired. Some of the shots in the past are colorful. The director intended it to be colorful because the entire film is black and white and kind of dark, and these are some beautiful memories in the story of the character, and he wanted it to paint it in a colorful way. So these are the shots painted in Photoshop with various other layers which were required to enhance the shot. Now these shots were then imported into After Effects, and the complete scene was composited with the required treatment, camera moves and color corrections. Then completed shots were then imported in Adobe Premiere and put onto the timeline and placed in a sequence. Now this is where basic editing was started, and each shot was sort of matched to the sound, and overall film was layered in Premiere, and this was the editing stage basically. Now sound design was a very important part in this film. Now scratch sound was created using various sound effects and material experimentation. So there are some interesting sounds once you hear the film and see the film, because the film happens inside a room, and the room is closed room, and there's almost pin drop silence. So what could be the sound of silence? Now the sound of silence usually, it's a very difficult challenge, but now the sound was created using a drone kind of a feel. Now how the drone feel was created by dropping the coin into a steel glass, and then that recorded sound was slowed down 200 or 300 times to kind of give that drone feel. Also the voice acting was done by the director himself in a closed room, and all that emotion had to be emoted and brought out in the sound itself. Finally the sound design was layered in Premiere, and a bit of audio effects manipulation was done, and the sound was completed. Some of the reference for the film here, and acknowledgement to the guide, Professor Sumant Rao, and special thanks to the professors and friends around.